The House on the Hill, The Discovery. April 13, 1945. The outskirts of Weimar, Germany. A beautiful, deceptively serene spring day. The war in Europe had mere weeks left to live, but here, in the rolling countryside, death wore a different face. It was not in the crump of artillery or the rattle of machine guns. It was waiting, silent and elegant, behind the polished oak door of a luxury villa. A squad of American soldiers from the 80th Infantry Division, their uniforms stained with the grime of a continent's liberation, moved with practiced caution. Intel was spotty, rumors of fleeing SS brass. With a heavy boot, a sergeant kicked open the grand door. What they expected was an enemy holdout, perhaps a hastily abandoned command post. What they found froze them in their tracks. The house was not abandoned. It was pristine. It was a snapshot of a life suspended in obscene luxury. Their boots, caked in the mud of 1,000 miles of combat, sank into plush, expensive Persian rugs. A crystal chandelier caught the afternoon sun, scattering prismatic shards across walls adorned with fine, if kitschy, oil paintings. The air itself was thick, perfumed with the cloying scent of expensive French perfume, a scent that fought and failed to mask something older, fainter, beneath. It looked like the home of a movie star, a Greta Garbo or a Marlene Dietrich in self-imposed exile. But it wasn't. This was the home of Ilse Koch, wife of Karl Otto Koch, the former commandant of the Buchenwald concentration camp. This was the sanctuary of the woman the prisoners whispered about in their fevered nightmares. They called her Die Hex von Buchenwald, the Witch of Buchenwald. The soldiers, weapons raised, fanned out. Their mission was clear: secure the premises, find any hidden officers, confiscate weapons. They moved through a dining room set for a ghostly dinner party, past a parlor with a grand piano, the sheet music still open. In the study, however, the mission veered into the surreal. The room was a testament to cultivated taste: leather-bound books, a heavy mahogany desk, a globe. An American sergeant, his eyes scanning for papers or a hidden safe, paused at a side table. On it stood a lamp. It was a beautiful object, incongruously domestic. The base was turned wood, elegantly simple. But it was the shade that drew the eye. It was made of a strange, pale leather, almost parchment-like. It was translucent, the faint outline of the bulb's filament was visible through its delicate surface. The sergeant, perhaps thinking of a letter to write home, reached out and touched it. The texture was all wrong. It wasn't the smooth grain of calfskin or the rugged feel of goatskin. It was odd, porous, with a peculiar, unsettling grain. It felt organic in a way that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. He leaned closer, squinting in the afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains. And then he saw them. Faint, but unmistakable. Lines. A pattern. The ghostly impression of a faded blue anchor, and beside it, swirling script, a name, perhaps, or a lover's dedication. A tattoo. He recoiled as if shocked. His voice, when it came, was a low, urgent croak. "Document, get over here. You need to see this." The company medic, a man who had seen every horror modern warfare could inflict, gut wounds, shattered limbs, men burned beyond recognition, ambled over. He picked up the lamp, turning it slowly in his hands. His professional curiosity turned to clinical examination, then to dawning, nauseous horror. He set the lamp down with deliberate care and moved to the bookshelf. He pulled a large, unmarked volume. The cover was of the same strange material. He opened a desk drawer. Inside lay a pair of ladies' gloves, finely stitched. Same texture. Same faint, horrific patterning. He looked back at the sergeant, his face drained of all color. "Sarge," he whispered, the word cutting through the perfumed silence. "That's not leather. That is human skin." A cold wave of revulsion swept through the room. The fine art, the expensive rugs, the crystal, the entire scene refocused into a diorama of pure evil. They were not standing in a villa. They were standing in a reliquary of the damned, a house decorated with the flayed remains of murdered men. The scent in the air was no longer just perfume, it was the smell of a charnel house dressed up for a tea party. This is the true story of Ilse Koch, a woman whose name became synonymous with a depravity that transcends the battlefield savagery of war. It is the story of a twisted aesthetic obsession, a collection of human trophies, and the flawed, stumbling pursuit of justice that finally, decades later, caught up with the witch of Buchenwald. But to comprehend the full, chilling significance of that lamp, we must travel back to the height of Nazi power, to the surreal and monstrous world she ruled beside her husband. A surreal kingdom, the villa next to hell. Ilse Koch was not born a monster. She was a secretary, a bookkeeper for an insurance company, when she met Carl Koch, an ambitious and notoriously brutal SS officer. They married in 1937, the same year he was appointed the first commandant of the newly constructed Buchenwald camp, near the cultured city of Weimar, home to Goethe and Schiller. Their home was a large, beautiful villa perched on a hill, literally overlooking the camp. From their manicured garden, they had a panoramic view of the misery below. This proximity created a surreal and psychologically warping existence. On one side of the barbed wire fence, starvation, forced labor, torture, and the constant, sweet acrid smoke from the crematorium. On their side, garden parties with other SS officers and their wives, the clink of fine crystal, the sound of a gramophone playing popular tunes. Ilse embraced this life completely. She saw the camp not as a place of suffering, but as her personal fiefdom, a source of unlimited power and privilege. Prisoners who survived her reign painted a unanimously chilling portrait. They remembered her as a striking, almost theatrical figure. She had a mane of red hair and favored tight-fitting riding breeches and tall boots. She would ride her horse through the camp's Appellplatz, roll call square, not for transportation, but for display and terror. In her hand, she carried not a standard riding crop, but a custom-made whip, its tip embedded with razor blades. Her gaze was a death sentence. If a starving, broken prisoner dared to look directly at her, she would take it as insolence and slash his face. If he averted his eyes, she would punish him for disrespect, the razor-tipped whip cutting into his back. She played a sadistic, unwinnable game. Her cruelty was psychological as well as physical. She would deliberately wear provocative, low-cut blouses or sheer stockings during prisoner inspections, taunting the emaciated men with a spectacle of health and sexuality they were forbidden to even acknowledge. She would note the numbers of those whose eyes lingered a moment too long, and those prisoners would later be summoned to the commandant's office or simply disappear. She was, as one survivor later testified, a master of the small, intimate torture. The collector, an obsession with skin. But Ilse Koch's infamy rests on a specific, macabre hobby that elevated her cruelty from brutal to uniquely grotesque. It began as a rumor, a whisper that snaked through the barracks: hide your tattoos. Do not show your skin. If she sees art she likes, she will want it for herself. In the 1930s and 40s, tattoos in Germany were far from mainstream. They were largely associated with sailors, criminals, and social outsiders. Buchenwald's prisoner population included many from these groups: sailors, resistance fighters, Roma men, who bore elaborate inkwork on their bodies, sailing ships, eagles, hearts, names of lovers, intricate patterns. For Ilse, these were not marks of identity or memory, they were curiosities, objets d'art on a living, breathing canvas. She transformed the camp's routine medical inspections into her personal shopping excursions. Prisoners would be forced to strip naked and stand for hours in the freezing wind. Ilse would accompany the camp doctors, strolling down the lines not to check for lice or disease, but to appraise the artwork. When she found a tattoo that captivated her, a beautifully rendered eagle across a man's shoulder blades, a detailed frigate on a chest, a poignant date inscribed on a forearm, she would stop. A faint, acquisitive smile might touch her lips. She would point with her whip and ask the attending physician, in a tone one might use to inquire about the quality of fruit, "Is this specimen healthy?" If the answer was yes, the prisoner was doomed. He was not sent back to the work gangs. He was given a new designation, patient for pathology. The factory of horrors, the Pathology Lab. The pathology laboratory at Buchenwald was the cold, clinical engine of this nightmare. It was here that the rumors crystallized into industrialized horror. When advance units of the U.S. Army liberated Buchenwald in April 1945, they discovered this lab largely intact. What they found within would become some of the most damning evidence of Nazi barbarism presented at the subsequent war crimes trials. The shelves were lined with glass jars filled with a clear, yellowish alcohol solution. Floating inside were specimens, but not of diseased tissue. They were perfectly preserved, 10 squares of human skin, each bearing a tattoo. Hundreds of them. Some were small, the size of a postcard, containing a single rose or a bird. Others were larger, sections of chest or back, displaying elaborate scenes. They were meticulously catalogued and stored like a perverse museum collection. But the skin, it was revealed, was not just for jars. Witnesses, including camp doctors and orderlies forced to assist, testified that Ilse Koch had made special requests. She wanted functional art. She commissioned specific items from the skilled, if horrified, prisoners in the camp's pathology and tannery departments. She ordered lampshades, like the one found in her villa. She requested book bindings for her personal library. She had designs for gloves, a portfolio to hold her stationery, even wall hangings. All were to be made from the specially tanned skin of the prisoners she had selected. The psychology here is what separates Ilse Koch from the mere sadist. It speaks to a profound, almost artistic dehumanization. She didn't just want her victims dead, she wanted to obliterate their humanity entirely, reducing them to decorative household commodities. Imagine the scene: Ilse Koch, sitting in her well-appointed living room as dusk fell, reading a romance novel bound in the skin of a man murdered that morning, the light from a lamp shaded with another man's chest casting a warm, hellish glow on her face. She was curating her life with the remains of people. It was a level of depravity that seemed to belong to a different species. When General George S. Patton, a man not easily shocked by war's viscera, was forced to tour Buchenwald, he became physically ill. He later wrote it was the work of beasts. But even among the jars of skin, one discovery stood out for its primal horror: 2 shrunken human heads. Reduced to the size of a fist, preserved through a tribal process, they were kept as paperweights or macabre curios. One was said to belong to a Polish prisoner who had attempted escape. For Ilse, they were trophies, the ultimate symbol of her absolute dominion over life and death. Flight, capture, and American justice. By the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. Carl Koch had already fallen victim to the very system he served. He was executed by the SS in 1944 for corruption, embezzlement, and the murder of a witness, crimes against the Nazi state itself. Ilse, now a widow, fled Buchenwald as the American forces approached. She shed her identity, attempting to blend into the chaotic stream of refugees. She found refuge with her family in the town of Ludwigsburg, playing the part of a grieving war widow, just another anonymous woman trying to survive the ruin of her country. She believed her crimes were invisible, that her role as just the commandant's wife would shield her. She was catastrophically wrong. The prisoners she had tormented did not forget. As the survivors of Buchenwald poured out their stories to Allied intelligence officers, one name kept recurring with venomous hatred: Ilse Koch. They described the red hair, the whip, the predatory inspections, and, in hushed, horrified tones, the lampshades. The U.S. Army launched a dedicated manhunt. On August 19, 1945, American military police surrounded her family's home. When they arrested her, she was the picture of indignant innocence. "I am just a woman," she protested. "I never hurt anyone. I had no rank, no authority. I was only the wife." She perfected the performance of the helpless Hausfrau, a victim of circumstance. But the Americans had the evidence. They had the villa's contents. They had the Pathology Lab. And they had a legion of living witnesses, their eyes burning with the memory of her, ready to point the finger. The show trial and a shocking clemency. In 1947, the Americans held the Buchenwald war crimes trials in Dachau. In the dock sat 31 defendants, SS officers, brutal guards, camp doctors. And among them, one woman, Ilse Koch. She became the media sensation of the trial, the bitch of Buchenwald. She sat through the proceedings with an air of cold, detached arrogance, often staring down the judges with undisguised contempt. The prosecution methodically laid out its case. The physical evidence was presented, photographs of the shrunken heads, the jars of skin, and the infamous lampshade itself, which had been brought into the courtroom. Then came the witnesses. One after another, gaunt men who had somehow survived described their nightmares. She pointed at my tattoo with her whip. I saw her beat a child to death for stealing a potato. I worked in the pathology block. We were ordered to prepare skins for her specifically. Ilse denied everything. The skins were goat leather, she claimed. The witnesses were liars, motivated by a desire for revenge. It was all sensationalist American propaganda. The military tribunal found her guilty of crimes against humanity. The sentence, life imprisonment. For a moment, it seemed a measure of justice had been served. The witch would rot behind bars. Then, in 1948, a legal earthquake struck. General Lucius D. Clay, the U.S. military governor of Germany, reviewed the sentences as part of a standard process. A lawyer by training, Clay examined the Koch file with a strict, dispassionate legal eye. He focused on a technicality: the most sensational piece of evidence, the human skin lampshade, had gone missing from the evidence locker, likely stolen by a souvenir hunter. Without that definitive physical object, and with some witness testimonies deemed inconsistent on specific details under rigid legal scrutiny, Clay made a fateful decision. He commuted Ilse Koch's sentence from life to 4 years imprisonment. Having already served nearly 3, she was scheduled for release in October 1949. The public outcry, particularly in the United States, was instant and volcanic. Newspaper headlines screamed, "Witch of Buchenwald to go free." Editorials condemned Clay's decision as a travesty. Holocaust survivors and veterans groups protested in fury. How could the architect of such unimaginable evil walk free after a mere 4 years? Clay defended his decision on narrow legal grounds, stating there was insufficient evidence to prove she had personally ordered murders to obtain tattoos. He may have been legally precise, but in the court of human conscience, he was seen as profoundly, disastrously wrong. German reckoning, a life for a life. Ilse Koch walked out of the American prison in Landsberg in October 1949, a free woman. She faced the press with a faint, triumphant smile. She believed she had beaten the system. She had forgotten one crucial factor: the new, democratic West Germany was eager to atone for the past, and it wanted its own justice. The moment she passed through the American gates, West German police were waiting. The Americans had tried her for crimes against humanity under military law. The Germans now arrested her for plain, old-fashioned murder, the murder of German citizens within Buchenwald. This was their jurisdiction, and their case was even more formidable. The German trial in Augsburg in 1950-51 was, if possible, more damning than the American proceeding. Freed from the technical constraints of a military tribunal, German prosecutors assembled an overwhelming case. New witnesses emerged. Former camp personnel, less fearful now of retribution, testified to her direct orders and active participation. The evidence of her obsessive, hands-on involvement in selecting tattooed prisoners was laid bare. The German prosecutor did not mince words, labeling her a perverted, power-mad beast. On January 15, 1951, the court found her guilty of incitement to murder, attempted murder, and grievous bodily harm. The sentence, life imprisonment, with hard labor, and no possibility of parole. This time, there was no higher clemency. The door slammed shut for good. The ghost in the cell. Ilse Koch spent the next 16 years in the women's prison at Achach. Her mind, never stable, deteriorated further in captivity. She fashioned herself a martyr, the victim of a vast Jewish Allied conspiracy. In rambling letters to her son, Uwe, born during her pre-trial detention in 1947, she painted herself as a loving mother, an animal lover, a simple woman who just enjoyed riding horses, tragically caught up in her husband's world. Uwe, struggling under the horrific burden of his mother's legacy, tried to find some kernel of humanity in her. He found only denial and a bottomless self-pity. On September 1, 1967, at the age of 60, Ilse Koch ate her final prison meal. She penned a short, final note, "I can't do this anymore." She then took her bed sheets, fashioned a noose, tied it to the window bars of her cell, and hanged herself. She died alone, in a cold, concrete room, a fate starkly similar to the thousands who had perished under her gaze, yet granted a choice and a moment of agency they were forever denied, the legacy of the lamp. The story of Ilse Koch forces us to confront uncomfortable questions that go beyond the simplistic archetype of the Nazi monster. She was not a frontline killer, she held no official position. Her evil was entrepreneurial, a hobby turned into a genocide of one. She illustrates how absolute power, coupled with moral vacuum and sadistic inclination, can corrupt absolutely. She did not just follow orders, she gave them. She did not merely tolerate the system, she enthusiastically exploited it for her own grotesque amusement and aesthetic gratification. The ultimate fate of the lampshade remains a mystery. Some reports claim it was secretly destroyed by ashamed officials. Others whisper it resides in a private collection of macabre artifacts, hidden from public view. But its power as a symbol endures. It is a tangible relic of the ultimate transgression, the reduction of human beings to raw material. General Patton was right to be sickened. Supreme Commander Eisenhower was right to order every citizen of Weimar to tour Buchenwald and to have it all filmed. Because stories like Ilse Koch's are so profoundly horrific that our minds rebel. We want to believe they are gothic fiction, the stuff of horror movies. The Witch of Buchenwald proves they are not. She is a dark testament to the human capacity for cruelty, a warning that evil can wear a smiling face, a fashionable dress, and an appreciation for the art it murders to acquire. She thought she was a queen, untouchable on her hill. But in the end, her legacy is not one of power or beauty, but of ash, shame, and a single, unanswered question that echoes from a sunlit room in April 1945, what darkness must reside in a soul to see a man not as a life, but as a lampshade?